Hi guys, how's it going? Welcome back to the Kitaholic Kits YouTube channel. I am going to work on a 12 by 12 layout today, and the reason I am choosing a 12 by 12 layout is because I'm sure I'm not the only one that noticed that this particular kit comes with a lot of circles. And I wanted to make use of those. So we've got these like chipboard frames or paper frames. We've got this whole page, which is a whole bunch of circles. We've got this one, which has got circles. We have the circle chipboard. So yeah, lots of circles. And so I thought a really good way to fit them all into like one layout is to do a 12 by 12 layout. So I have chosen my photos and I've cut them down into 3-inch circles. So this is from a friend's hen's night that I went to recently, and the reason I chose this particular event to go to is to use in this kit is because I wanted to focus on the yellows and the greens a bit more. So as you can see, there's like greens in the background here, and this one's got lots of yellow and green. So that's why I wanted to use it, because there's some pops of yellow in this kit as well. It's a slightly different yellow, so what my plan is to, moving along. So this is the page that I'm going to be using. I am either going to do a circle layout going down the page or going across the page. And I haven't decided what I want to do yet. I will decide as I'm going, kind of what my vibe is, what I'm feeling. But I want to bring in some more of that yellow by doing a mixed media background. So my plan is to use these Vicky Bouton watercolors that we got in the mixed media kit this month to create a subtle, I'm going to use the yellow one, just to create a subtle yellow watercolor background. Then I am thinking of using this like more bright sunshine Dilutions spray, sorry, excuse me, to add a bit of sprinkles to kind of create that pop of yellow. And then lastly, I was thinking of using these shimmery paints that we got last month in the mixed media kit to create little yellow and pink dots to bring in some of the pink from these photos. We'll see how it all works out. I am excited to play with some paints and get a bit messy, and if it doesn't work out in the end, you will see the process as it unfolds. But yeah, thank you very much for joining me. I will switch to voiceover now. Bye. So I pre-wet those watercolors a little bit because I think they need to be activated just a bit before you pick up so much more of the pigment if you wet them beforehand. I basically right away decided that I wanted to go for a horizontal type of layout rather than a vertical look. So I switched it immediately, and then my mind was in sort of that place about it's all about being vertical. Now, in terms of these watercolors, as with any watercolor, not just the shimmy one, but they tend to dry with quite a harsh border. So as you saw me do there, I softened the edges as it was drying with just a wet brush, not any paint on my brush. And then that softens the edges a little bit. I also decided kind of early on that I think I want to use this pink to bring in some of the pink rather than using necessarily the pink paint that I was talking about before. And I'm just adding a lot of splatters and just mixing it all around. By this stage, I thought that maybe this layout looked a bit like it was just a solid block of watercolor. So that is why I'm doing what I'm doing here and just lifting up the top and the bottom a little bit so there was a bit more flow and movement going around. This is where I add the Dilutions spray just to add a little bit of that darker yellow. Although in the final layout, it doesn't really look too different because I do mix it in with that little bit of a pink as well. And I quite like how that looks, but you don't really see it too much in the final layout anyway. But yeah, that's all fine. Don't know why I added the green there. It was a decision that I made, I guess. But yeah, anyway, moving on. With these watercolors, they tend to look, because they're not a solid color, they're quite glittery. From one view, they look quite shiny, and then another, they can look a bit dull. So that's just one thing to keep in mind. They are very shimmery, and the same thing is if you use shimmery acrylics, they can look very shiny and then also quite dull. But that is why I'm adding a bit more pigment here. I was going to do a light wash, but I decided to add a bit more brightness and pigment as I'm doing here, and knowing obviously that this was mostly going to be covered up. It's just a background. And what I do later down the track, which you'll see, is once I add all my photos, I do go back in and add a little bit of more brightness around the photos and the circles. So anyway, that was dry, and then I'm trying this technique. I saw this technique on TikTok and I love it. So I would recommend it. The person who did it on TikTok used it with all of the leftover watercolor paint that they had in like their palette that is dried. They wet it, but I decided to just use it with some ink that I had. But basically, you take any plastic circular item. I'm using the lid from one of my embossing powders, and you mix it with water and you create these little bubbles. But then what you do is you take a wet brush and you sort of paint the inside, and it really makes it look like bubbles, which I thought was so cool. Does this layout have anything to do with bubbles? Absolutely not. But I just thought it looked amazing. And if you use it with like multiple colors, it looks even more like bubbles. But I wanted to focus on the green, like I said. But I really love how this looks. I also added that tiny little pop of blue because I thought there's a bit of blue in the photos as well, and in the colors of the kit. But yeah, so this, I think it was Josie Lewis on TikTok or maybe Reels. I can't remember, but I loved how it looked. So that's my background done. Now I'm going to be doing those little bubbles a lot more. I use 2 sizes. You can use any size of whatever plastic thing you happen to have. I thought it was quite awesome. So what I'm doing now is I took 3 of the coordinating papers in the kit, and I am just cutting them out in, I think it's either 2.5 or 3 inch circles. I'm not 100% sure. But I took the 3 that I liked the most, so that's those 3 colors, and I thought they looked really good with the photos, and because I already have that all that yellow and pink in the background. Now I am taking my 4 photos and I am going to mat them on some cardstock. Now I choose more of a neutral cardstock, I believe. So 2 of them is on that green and blue and yellow crisscrossy checkered paper, and 2 of them is on just that grey plain paper. So the reason I mat them is just because I really wanted to bring a lot of the papers into this layout because, like I said, it's all coordinating. Now you will see that I have got 4 photos, and generally when it comes to this kind of thing, I like to have like uneven numbers. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually layer that photo of all the flowers off the center of my page. I'm going to cut it off, and I'm going to add the other half of that photo to the other side of the layout. And I think that our eyes as human beings, we prefer uneven numbers. It looks more aesthetic to us. So this is where I'm going to be cutting that off. I'm starting with layering my photos, and it's once I'm happy with the photos placement, and I didn't want them to be too uniform, so they kind of also look like a bit of the bubbles floating behind there. Then I'm going to start layering in those background papers because they were the second largest element. So looking here, I see that they are definitely smaller than 3 inches because I know my photo is 3 inches. So I imagine those circles are 2.5 inches. And then I'm going in with the circles, the smaller circles that I cut out of those circle papers. I really love how this all turned out. That circle that I've got in my hand now that says fun, I end up putting that below that one that says together. And I don't like what I do with that one because I thought it was a bit plain and a bit boring. So I'm like, okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to color it in, and I choose a color that's just not the right color. And so you'll see in the final photos, actually, I chose a completely different circle from that cut apart circle 12 by 12 paper. So basically here I am happy with how this layout looks, and I now realize I need to start gluing it down. I didn't want it all to be flat on the layout. So I am taking any elements that are directly touching my photos, and I am sticking them down so that they touch my photos. And in this way I create 2 clusters. One for those photos that you just saw, and the other for the other 2 photos on the left-hand side. Sorry, my brain stopped there for a second. And those 2 clusters are the ones that I actually will prop up on foam tape. Everything else that's behind it will be glued straight to the page, as you can see me doing here. So there's my one circle cluster that I'm going to prop up on foam tape, and then the other one will be the other two photos on the right hand side. I don't bother doing it with that other photo, the yellow on the other side, because like I said, that photo was more there, not so much to be like, look at this photo, but it was more there for balance, to balance the color, to balance the number of circles. So that one I just glue straight down. So yeah, once this is down and I'm happy with where it's placed, I go in and I stick down the circles behind it. With some of them, I used my tape roller. With other ones, I just use, like there I use my tape roller. And with other ones, I go in and I have to use some glue because it was hard to kind of reach in there. So I think that's one of the ones that I use sort of glue. What I just wanted to do is kind of at the end just make sure that every circle has got some form of adhesive on top of it or behind it. Yeah, that's basically it. One thing I didn't like, which I don't know why I did that, but I'm realizing that now, I didn't like those two stars next to each other. So I do break them up a little bit down the track, but you'll see that happen a bit later. For now, I am taking these circle frames and I start sticking them down. I cut it into two pieces, one much larger and one much smaller. And I'm using all of those circle frames in this layout. And by tucking them underneath the photos and the pre-existing full circles, it does make it look like there's a whole circle there, basically, if that makes sense. Again, I'm sort of playing with this. Those chipboard circles frames are not super sticky, so I can move them around. Once they're down though and they stick there for a while, they're down for good, so just keep that in mind. But I can play around with them and move them around a little bit. Added that little smiley face there, and now I'm going into this chipboard circle sheet and I'm finding phrases or sentiments that kind of make sense even though they don't 100% make sense. Like that one says high five, which I don't think any of us high-fived that night, but hey, it doesn't matter. This is the sticker sheet, and again, pulling just any circular or rounded elements to add to this layout. Now I'm going in and I want to add some more of that color into these circles where there's not much happening in terms of color. I like what I did with that circle that says together, and I like what I did with this one, the little dash border, but I go in with one of my Jane Davenport pens. Oh yeah, I do some dotty dots as well with the pink, which I like too. I choose a color that I think matches, and at first it did match, but as it dries, this one here, as it dries, it just becomes more of a vibrant yellow and not exactly what I was looking for. So this is where I go in and I add a bit more of that background color using these beautiful shimmery watercolor paints. And yeah, just making sure I actually get that paint in there. And I'm doing the same technique that I talked about before where I soften the edges so that I don't get that like harsh edge. These little half circle stickers were also really good because again, I can tuck them underneath the layers on top and it makes it look like it's a full circle just tucked underneath. So that is kind of nifty. So I'm using the happy hour one because we actually were at this particular bar for happy hour and then we were hanging out. So yes, it made all sense. And I like how I sort of balanced it quite well. So that's where I create that little border between those two stars, blocking one of them a little bit, but I didn't really care. I really just wanted to create that separation. Anyway, this layout is almost done after my huge mouthful. I didn't actually add much journaling just because I write about it in a few other places, so I didn't feel like I needed the journaling. And yeah, that is this one. As you can see, I've changed it up to living up to the hype. But yeah, I will see you all next week for another layout. Bye.